Hello everyone, this is Wozniak with Telerik, and in this video I'll be showing how to bind the data from a WCF RIA service to the RadGridView. And I'll be showing this in the context of an application that I've developed in Silverlight 4 called Taskit. It's a task management application. What we'll do first is take a look at the user interface for this application, and then we'll take a look at some of the code. So the first thing I'll do is click into the tasks page. And when I do, you notice that we have a RadGridView over here on the left side that's got various task categories, projects, and contexts, and so forth. And on the right-hand side, we've got the RadGridView that displays the list of tasks. Now, as I click on different categories, it will make a call to the back end via RIA Services in order to obtain data for this task category, waiting. Or I could click into one of the projects like Taskit blog posts, and once again it makes a call via RIA Services to get that data. Now, one other thing that I can do is in the upper right hand corner here, you'll notice that there's a Rad combo box that allows me to view my completed tasks or my incomplete tasks. So if I look at completed, you can see here the blog posts that I've completed, and if I go back to incomplete, these are the ones that I still need to do. So now in Visual Studio, let's take a look at the user control that the RadGridView lives in. So this is called grid.xaml. You see it over here on the right-hand side in the Solution Explorer under the Taskit Modules Tasks project. And so if I scroll down about here, we'll see here is my RadGridView. It's got a unique identifier, GRD data. Its item source is bound to a property called tasks. Now, the Taskit application uses the MVVM pattern, so the data context for this user control is an instance of a ViewModel class. So this property task lives in my ViewModel. You could also do this via code behind if you prefer not to use the MVVM pattern. Now I'm also bound here, my selected item is bound to a property in my ViewModel called selected item. It's important that the mode is two-way binding here. What this means that every time somebody clicks an item in the RadGridView, it notifies the ViewModel that the selected item has changed. You also notice that my visibility is bound to a property in my ViewModel called hasTasks. And on that I'm using a converter, a Boolean to visibility converter. This is something that comes as part of the Telerik DLLs. One other thing I'd like to show is up here above the RadGridView. I've got a text box, and this is also bound to the hasTask property. The only difference is that instead of using the Boolean to visibility converter, this uses the inverted Boolean to visibility converter, which is also part of the Telerik DLLs. So basically the idea here is that if the WCF RIA service returns data, the grid will appear, and if it does not return data, this text block will appear and it'll present a message that says that there are no items found. Now let's take a look at the ViewModel class. So you can see here under ViewModels we've got a ViewModel called ListViewModel. Now normally I would have called it GridViewModel since it's associated with a user control called grid, but the reason it's called ListViewModel is that this ViewModel actually drives not only the grid, but there's also a calendar view that shows the tasks in a RAD scheduler. So I'm using the same ViewModel for both the grid.xaml and for the calendar.xaml. So let's fire our application up in debugging mode this time. And once again, I'll click on Tasks. And you'll see here that it comes into a method called load tasks. So this is the place where all my tasks are going to get loaded. And there's quite a bit of code in here, and that's basically to handle all the different types of things that you can click on in the tree view on the left-hand side. So when you click something in the RadGridView, it passes an event, and it passes an object called entity filter args. Now, part of that is the entity type. So it says the entity type is task category. So if I step into this switch statement, you'll notice that one of the properties of the entity filter args that are passed as part of the event from the RadGridView is the ID, and you can see here it's an ID of 2. So it's going to skip over the if part in this if-else statement. I'm going to store a reference to what the selected task category is, and I'm going to call into a method in my data provider class called getTaskByCategory. So if I actually go into that. This is a class that's responsible for making all the calls back to the RIA services on the back end. So if I hit F5 and run, you'll see that I've set a breakpoint in my data service. Now my data service lives in my web project here under services. So this is my WCF RIA service method. And you can see from my data context, my tasks, I'm going to do some link filtering in order to get the tasks that I want. So the user ID is going to come in. The value here is 3. That's always 3. That's just hard-coded for now in the TaskGrid application because I don't have authentication up front, so I've just hard-coded a value. My task category ID is 2. We saw that earlier. And so we're doing some link filtering to say where the user ID is 3 and where the task category ID is 2. And then I call into a utility method called getCompleteTaskQuery. And you can see that I've used this as I highlight some of these other methods. They all call into this same thing. So let's step into that and see what it does. So as I come into getCompleteTaskQuery, the first thing it's going to look at is if showDo is true or false. Now this is always going to be false when I'm viewing data in the RadGridView. This is something that pertains to the calendar view when you're looking at the Rad scheduler. So let's go by that. And you'll see that what we're doing is actually adding on to the link query that we had already started, and we're doing some additional filtering. So basically, if we're going to look at show completed, right now that's that drop down that we saw in the upper right hand part of the user interface. So right now show completed is false. So it's going to show the incomplete tasks. So because that's the case, it's going to go to the second part of this statement, and you can see here it's going to add on an additional where statement, and it's going to say where the completion date is equal to null, so that's going to give me my incomplete tasks, and I want to order them by due date. So as I hit F5, you'll see that my tasks appear in my RadGridView. So let's change to complete tasks, and we'll F5, and we'll get here, and we'll see that show completed is now true. So when I go into my get completed task query, it's actually going to add this where statement where it says completion date is not equal to null and order by completion date. And if I hit F5 there, that shows my completed tasks. Now let's try one more thing. Try filtering by project. So if I click on Taskit blog posts, you'll see that my entity type now is project because I've clicked on a project node. So as I step down here, you'll see that it's going to come down here. I'm going to store my selected project. Once again, it's going to call into my data provider, and it's going to call get tasks by project. So if I run, it's going to go to the back end, and instead of calling the get tasks by query method, it's going to call get tasks by project. Once again, our user ID is 3, but now our project ID is 24. So this is going to run through the same service utility method that we saw earlier and add on the additional where statement, and when we continue by hitting F5, it's now showing my Taskit blog posts. So one other thing I'd like to point out is that you'll notice the last argument to all these methods when I'm in my ViewModel class, whether it be filtering by task category or project and so forth, the last argument is the callback method that will be called when the asynchronous call for data via RIA Services goes off and then comes back. So here you see on task loaded, on task loaded, on task loaded. So no matter what type of filtering I'm doing, it's going to go into that method. So let's right click on that and go to declaration. Now let's set a breakpoint here and run our application again. Now when I click on tasks, it's going to come into my load tasks method, go by that, go by that. Now you see here, this is my callback. So my data has returned from RIA Services. First thing I do is check to see if there's an error. There is no error. I'll skip over that. What I'll do is I'll tell the user interface that the tasks collection has changed because I've loaded some new data. Now the second line actually pertains to that Rad scheduler, that calendar view that I talked about earlier. But you'll also see that hasTask, my hasTask property, is going to be set based on whether the task count is greater than 0 or not. So that's going to determine whether the data is going to show in my RadGridView or whether the message is going to show saying that there was no data found. So that's a basic overview of how to return data from WCF RIA Services and bind it to the RadGridView. So please keep an eye out for other videos around Taskit and the techniques and technologies involved in its development. Thank you.